Hi everyone, Desmond here, developer advocate at Sitecore. Today, I'm going to be covering executing GraphQL queries on your front end with Next.js. You'll learn using a GraphQL client, making your first query, and displaying that data on the front end. In this video, I'll be using Experience Edge for Content Hub as my GraphQL endpoint. So check out my previous video, Getting Started with Experience Edge for Content Hub, if you want to learn how I set that up. But with that, let's get to learning. Okay, so I want to start this video at the very beginning. I'm going to first do a create next app to create a brand new next application. So we're starting this at the very beginning. Here in my terminal, I'm going to use npx to create a next app that uses TypeScript. That --ts at the end is what tells Next.js that I want to use TypeScript. So I'll let this run. I'll give it a project name. And then we're on our way for this to set up a blank, brand new Next.js application using their standard starter kit. You'll see now it's installing the TypeScript related things. Let's change our directory into that new project and open up VS Code. All right, so here I am in VS Code with our brand new Next.js application. The first thing I want to do is create my environment variables file. This is where we're going to store our API keys for our Content Hub instance, as well as the endpoint. So I'd like to just get that out of the way so we can start moving forward and we have those accessible to us in the future. So to do that, I'll create a .env.local. And this is where we're going to store all of our environment variables. When we go to host this project and create the project in Vercel, we're going to want to make sure that these environment variables are added to that project as well, so that we can have them available to us in production. Inside of here is where you would put your preview and your delivery API endpoints. And for this project, I'm just going to use my preview, so I'll add that in here now. And I'm going to blur out my API key in here when I paste it in, just for security reasons. So these are my two environment variables that I want accessible to me inside of my application, and I will later on be putting into Vercel when I actually push this out to production. Another thing to remember, this shouldn't be a problem if you use create next app. If you are creating a local environment variables file, make sure that this does not go into source control because it's going to hold all those API keys that you don't want public. Now it's time to start thinking about making our GraphQL request. And for this, I actually want to bring in a GraphQL client that we can use and add to our front end. This isn't required because at the bare minimum, making a GraphQL request is really just making a post request. But I do think that using a client is helpful when making GraphQL requests, so that's what I'm going to do here. And we're actually going to be using the package GraphQL request. So this is a really popular front-end client. It's really lightweight, and it helps us get started easier. So to bring this into our application, all we need to do is this install method here, npm add GraphQL-request and the GraphQL. So let's do that now so that we can begin using it as our GraphQL client. So back in VS Code, I'll open up my terminal and I will paste that command in. So this is going to add GraphQL request to our application. It's installed now, so now it's accessible to us. And where we want to head now is our index.ts so we can use that GraphQL client and start making requests to our endpoint. So because I created this with create next app, there is no get static props inside of the index.ts file. So first we want to add that in here so we can query and pull in data that we can use on our front end. So the first thing I'm going to do is add in get static props. I can get rid of context here and get static props. We'll pull that import in. And now inside of our get static props is where we're going to set up our GraphQL client. In the long term, this isn't where you want to set it up. You don't want to set up a client for every single page. So we'll refactor that out later. But just for this first instance, to make our first request, I want to put it all in here so we can see it all together. So to start using that GraphQL request client, we'll need to have our endpoint, and we'll need to create a new GraphQL client. So first, let's set up our endpoint. We'll use process.env to access that from our local environment variables folder. And then we can create a new client. And the only argument this takes is our endpoint. Remember, when using GraphQL, you only ever have to access one endpoint. It's the query itself that determines what data is going to come back. So we'll need to pull in an import statement to bring in our GraphQL client. And while I'm here, I'm going to bring in GQL, which is the GraphQL query language, and that's just going to help us when we have to write our query. So we'll pull that in from GraphQL request, and this is complaining here because it can't be an undefined or string, it has to be just a string. So let's put as string inside of for our GraphQL endpoint. If you remember, we have to set header information. The XGQL token has to be set to our API key in order to be authorized for our requests. So let's do that now. There's an easy set headers method on GraphQL client. So here we pass in our key of XGQL token and give that the value of our API key that we have in our variables. And this also needs to be a string. So we'll set that as a string. So now we have our client. We've set up the header so we can make an authorized request. If you remember from the last video, getting started with Experience Edge for Content Hub, my Content Hub instance had blog data in it. So I'm going to have a query here that pulls in all of my blog data. So this query, all content blog, is going to pull in all of my blog data, and for every result, I'm going to get the blog title and the blog body. So we can do a simple GraphQL client request here. We'll pass our query in, and we want to make sure that we await this. This is an asynchronous request, so we want to make sure that we await this request so that when we get our data back, it's the actual data that we want. So this data, we're going to want to pass this in on line 27, so we have access to it down below in our home component. So let's pass that in. And right now, we can do a real simple, just log out of that data in our component just to see and make sure that's coming back. So we'll access data here. I'm going to just make this of type any, just so it doesn't complain. And we can log that data out and see and make sure that it's coming out on our front end. So we can open up our terminal, run our dev environment, and see this in action. Let's open up the terminal, run our npm run dev, let that open up on localhost 3000 and see what it looks like. Here in my browser, I've got my localhost 3000. Let's refresh it just to make sure. And you can see, yeah, my data is coming back. I'm getting that all content blog, and I'm getting all 6 of my blog posts here. So it's working. We're making a GraphQL request from our front end, and we're logging that data out to the console. Granted, we're not using that data at all right now. We're just logging it out. But that's the very beginning. We've successfully went from Next.js front end to our Content Hub instance, and we pulled in our data via GraphQL. Cool. Next up, let's use this data and actually put it on the page. I'm back in VS Code, and now it's time to make some modifications so that we can actually print this data out to the page. I'm going to do this really simply. I'm just going to map over all of the data, use one of the existing cards they have here, and print that data out into the page. So Next.js makes it really nice for us. We have this on line 52, a grid of just a bunch of cards. So let's modify these cards so that it actually starts showing our data. And what's nice is we can use the map feature because we don't know how many blogs might come back. There might be a lot of blogs we end up writing in the future. So using the map component lets us map over every single one of the elements and create a card for it. So let's do it. So the first thing that I want to actually do is get rid of the other hard-coded cards and leave ourselves with just one. We're going to make this the single card that becomes dynamic. And what we want to do is loop over all of our data. So we have data, and we want to do that all m_content blog. We'll look at the results of that, and we're going to map over all of those results. So each of those would be a go blog. I'm going to give this a type any just to get us started. And now inside of here, I want to bring in our card. And what this is complaining about here is that there's no key element. When you're mapping over things in an array, you want to give them a key. So on our top level item here, I will give it a key, and that will just be our blog title. So let's see what this actually looks like inside of our web page. So what you can see is that we have this documentation thing 6 times. Because we have 6 blog posts, it's going to print this out 6 times. So instead of using this documentation thing, let's actually bring in our blog data. So instead of saying documentation here, let's give it the title of our blog. And for our paragraph here, we'll put in our blog content, or the blog body. Cool. So we can refresh just to make sure. What we can see now is that we are mapping over all of that data that comes back, and we're putting these into different cards here inside of our blog posts. So we're now printing that data out into our front end. We're pulling it in from Content Hub through GraphQL endpoint, which is really cool. If you remember in the beginning though, we put our client here up inside of getStaticProps. That's really not how you're going to do this in the long term. So let's refactor this out to its own file so we can start making this a little more reusable. So the first thing I want to do is actually create a folder for our GraphQL content. And inside of there is where I want to have my client and my queries. So I'll have a GraphQL client.ts. And inside of here is where we're going to create and export that client. We want to do it once and make it available everywhere. So I can pull out this content here. I'll put it in here. You'll know what we need to bring in our GraphQL client import. We won't need GQL in here, so I can get rid of that. But then we can export our GraphQL client and make that available everywhere. So now in our index page, we should be able to just bring in this GraphQL client. Instead of bringing it in, so I'm going to get rid of GQL here. And instead of bringing it in from GraphQL request, we'll bring it in from where we created it there in our GraphQL folder. We can take off the brackets, and we'll want to make this our lowercase g as well. So now we have that generic GraphQL client here that we can import into any one of our pages when we want to use it. It's already got the header information set up. We can just make the request wherever we need to bring in data. What I also see pretty commonly is that people will put all of their queries in one location, or they'll, depending on how many queries you have, they'll organize it differently, but you probably wouldn't put your query directly into your getStaticProps. So let's also create a queries file to go inside of here. And we can bring in that query here. And this is where we'll want to make that import for GQL now. That'll make that accessible for us. And so this query is going to be a query that gets all of our blog data. So we can just call it all blog data. And we'll want to make sure that we export this as well. So now all blog data is accessible to us inside of our index.js. So now we want to change this query to use that all blog data. So we can import all blog data. Bring that in. And we can use that inside of our request. So this is a format that's a little more typical, where you want to have your GraphQL client, you can import it, and you can import your query, and just use those directly inside of getStaticProps. You're probably not going to want to set up your client, set up the authorization in every single one of your pages. So this sort of a setup moves you away from that. So this is how far I wanted to get in this video. We created a brand new Next.js application. We made our very first request to our GraphQL endpoint using GraphQL request client, and we brought in that data and displayed it out into our front end. We even did a little bit of refactoring here at the end to make our GraphQL client more reusable. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, leave it a like, and if you want to see future content, make sure to subscribe. Thanks!